Hello YTPC, Ethan, Parsimonious Piper here. And today we have some morsels for mental manducation. In particular, we're going to talk about disparate impact. But first, in a little 2-star carved pipe by Lee Levat, I have got some more of that Watch City Nor'easter. Good stuff. Disparate impact. This is one of the favorites of race hustlers on the left in the US. The concept is that if any policy, whether it's a public policy or a private corporate policy, anything, a law, has a different impact in the end on one race, well, let's be real, not if that race is white, but if it has a negative impact on any minority race, then the law itself is racist. Because even if the language is not racist and race is not mentioned or applied in using the law, if it has a disparate impact, in particular a negative impact on minorities, then the law itself must be racist. So for example, felony convictions in the United States, in many states, have minimum sentencing laws, particularly for commission of violent felonies. Now, regardless of what race you are, if you commit said felony, you get a minimum sentence. You will spend time in prison. In many states, there are more minorities who are convicted of violent felonies than there are whites. And so this law sends more minorities to prison than it does whites. Therefore, the law itself requiring sentences for violent crimes must be racist. It has a disparate impact. Doesn't matter whether the crime statistics as collected by either the State Bureau of Investigation or the FBI and DOJ, whether they demonstrate that violent crimes are committed disproportionately by minorities, the law itself must be racist. Another example, banking standards. When banks have a truly common sense standard for giving out mortgages, that in order to qualify for the mortgage, you have to have X% down payment available to put down on the house, and you have to be able to verify that you have a certain amount of monthly income so that the bank believes you have the ability to repay the loan. Now, if those rules, although they affect all of the poor of all races alike, if those rules in some areas affect more minorities than they do whites, usually because there are more minorities in the area than there are whites, as in inner cities, then those bank rules themselves must be racist. Never mind that they are simply standard economic common sense rules. If you were going to lend your money to someone, would you not want to make sure that they had the ability to repay you regardless of whether they're black, white, or purple? I would. Third and final example that's often used right now and has been for a number of years. School districts. Most school districts traditionally have had rules for behavior and expectations that students will adhere to those rules. And if those rules are broken, then students have set punishments based on how many times they've broken the rules and so on, including things like either in-school or after-school detention, suspensions, that kind of thing. In many places, if those rules end up with more minority students than white students serving detention, then the rules are deemed racist, regardless of who is actually being disruptive in the classroom. Quite ironically, this is true in many inner city schools where the administration and the teachers tend to be minorities, and they are the ones meting out the punishment. Disparate impact. It must be racist. Now, this idea, of course, is never carried over the other direction. If it's white people, for example, nobody says that the NBA must be racist because the majority of its players are black. We simply recognize that right now, at least in history, the best basketball players in the United States and from around the world tend to be black. That's not racist. It's just a fact. Look at Major League Baseball. Disproportionately high number of Latinos in Major League Baseball. Does that mean baseball is racist in favor of Latinos? No. It just means that right now, at this point in history, there are more Latinos who are playing a very high level of baseball than other races in relation to their proportion of the population. It doesn't mean that it's racist just because there are more of them. And the same is true when negative things happen. Now, to demonstrate that this is simply a race hustle and that they're not really serious, let me throw up 3 examples of things you don't hear the left complaining about being racist. One, sin taxes. If Congress doubles, triples, or multiplies by 100 the sin taxes on alcohol, tobacco, any other products like that, or if your state legislature does, that impacts rich people not at all. They can still afford to buy whatever they want. Good grief, there are people out there who can afford to smoke $100 cigars like I smoke $2 bulks. Who is impacted when you raise those kinds of sin taxes? Oh, the poor. They can't afford the increased taxes. It's a great way of controlling them. Now, who does the left tell us are the wealthy and the poor, racially? By their own rules? Disparate impact? Who's protesting? Or consider state gun licensing, registration, training, fees, and requirements. You can jack those up. The rich are impacted not at all. They can either afford to hire their own private security, many of them do, live in gated communities, many of them do, or simply pay the fees in order to get their own handgun license, firearms license. They can afford it. Jack it up all you want. What's an extra $500, $750, $1,000 for a license? Same thing with insurance requirements. The wealthy can afford to pay whatever liability insurance you want to require. The poor can't. And again, who does the left tell us comprises the poor racially? Disparate impact. Last example. Vaccine mandates. Regardless of how they're approached, who does a vaccine mandate impact? Not the wealthy or the middle and most of the middle and upper middle classes, quite frankly. Because as long as there is an option to do weekly testing, even if it's at the individual's expense, the upper classes can afford that. Or they can afford to work from home. They can afford to start their own business. There are lots of things that the upper and upper middle classes can afford to do. Guess who can't afford to just say no to the vaccine without losing their job and can't afford to pay for testing every week? That's right. The working classes and the poor. the working poor. Who makes up those classes according to the left? Disparate impact. But you won't hear a single person who screams racism about the first three. Scream racism about the second three, even though the same logic applies to both. Now, are there rules and laws that really do have an unfair impact on different races? Probably. But the ones you will hear about, those are not them. Keep that in mind next time you hear somebody talking about how some policy or law has a disparate impact. Take a look at what that policy or law is. Ask yourself, does that law make common sense? And if so, why is it having a different impact on different races? Or is it even, really? With that, light something you like. Enjoy your afternoon.